Hola todos! For the current Year 11s, your final Spanish exam, the writing one is on the 13th of June. So in this video, I'm going to walk through the entire higher tier paper, answering the questions myself and showing you how to get top marks in the writing questions, as well as a translation at the end. So the layout of the writing paper for both AQA and Edexcel is quite similar. You have the 90-word question, the 150-word question, and the English into Spanish translation. You will do another translation at the end of the reading paper, but that one is easier in a way because it's Spanish into English. Just to run through the timings, I would spend 25 minutes on the first question, 35 minutes on the second question, and 10 minutes on the translation. Then you will have 5 minutes at the end to proofread if you're doing AQA, and 10 minutes at the end if you're doing Edexcel. Now we've got that out of the way, let's move on to the first question. I'm going to teach you how to plan it myself, and then you can pause the video to attempt the question yourself. This question is taken from the November 2021 paper. I would strongly recommend you plan these sorts of questions, so spending 3 to 4 minutes will be sufficient for that. First off, of course, read the entire question. Then write down the tense of each bullet point. This will help you see where you can add extra tenses, because of course you are marked on your variety of tenses, so aim to have at least 4 different tenses. Then you can write down any spicy phrases or idioms you want to use. I would memorize an acronym of some phrases, so the first letter of each phrase is make a word, and then tick off each phrase as I used it. Lastly, I recommend making a note of how you are going to answer each bullet point. If you've done a thorough plan, writing the answer will be super simple and should not take too much time at all. This is how I have planned my answer. The first bullet point is in present tense because it's asking about your current opinion about your house. And I've written beside plus imperfect, meaning I will use the imperfect tense too in response to this bullet point. Again, adding other tenses where possible to increase the quality of language mark. The second bullet point is in preterite, and the dead giveaway there is la última vez, meaning the last time. And I'll use the conditional tense with this bullet point too. The next one is in present tense, and the future will be my additional one. And lastly, vas a vivir is the near future tense. Now on the right, I've written the acronym STARS, which is something I would have pre-memorized before the exam, and now I have 4 nice phrases and 1 idiom to use for this question. By giving yourself these parameters of what phrases and tenses you have to use, you'll spend less time thinking what to say and more time writing. You make these decisions before the exam, so in the exam you can just write knowing you will get the top marks. Now I think I'm ready to write. I recommend at this point you pause the video and have a go at least some of the bullet points yourself. Now here is my answer. Just before we have a read through it, you should immediately notice that I have answered in 4 paragraphs. This is exactly what you should do in the exam to make it clear for you and the examiner that you have covered all the bullet points. Now to read my answer. A mi modo de ver, mi casa es muy limpio y moderno. Sin embargo, cuando era joven no me gustaba mi casa ya que pensaba que era demasiado pequeña. So in this paragraph, I've used both the present tense with mi casa es and the imperfect tense with no me gustaba. I've also used an interesting sentence starter with a mi modo de ver instead of something simpler like en mi opinión, but they both mean the same thing. Now for the next paragraph, answering the question of what did you do the last time you visited an interesting site in your region. So, ayer fui a un parque grande en mi barrio. Me encantó el paisaje, sin embargo mi hermano no le gustó y se aburrió como una ostra. Si tuviera más dinero, me gustaría viajar fuera de mi región. In this paragraph, I've used the preterite tense with fui and me encantó, and the conditional tense with me gustaría. I have also used the idiom aburrirse como una ostra, meaning to get bored like an oyster. And I've used one of my spicy phrases, si tuviera más dinero. Now on to the third paragraph, answering the question of what do you do to have a healthy life? So, para llevar una vida sana, como verduras y frutas, según mi padre, hacer ejercicio es bueno para tu salud. Para ser honesto, raramente hago ejercicio. So in this paragraph, I've used the present tense. I have not included the future tense, even though in my plan I said I would. But again, you can change your plan, you can change what you write, as long as overall you have a good variety of tenses, etc. So in this third paragraph, I've used one of my phrases, según mi padre, and raramente. Now on to the fourth one. ¿Dónde vas a vivir en el futuro? To the near future tense. Voy a vivir en una mansión cerca de una playa en el futuro y tengo la intención de tener un gran salón en casa. So I've used the future tense, tengo la intención de, and the near future tense, voy a vivir, and I've used now all of my 5 phrases that I said I was going to use. So, según mi padre, tengo la intención de, the idiom, raramente, and si tuviera más dinero. This would be a full mark or near full mark answer. The key points to remember is answer all the bullet points and use a variety of tenses, more than what they give you. Now let's look at the mark scheme. And this is the AQA mark scheme for question 1, so you get 10 marks for content and 6 marks for quality of language. There is no reason you shouldn't be getting 16 out of 16 in this question. As you can see, as long as you have a variety of vocabulary, complex structures, which if you memorize beforehand, you'll be perfectly fine, and reference the 3 time frames, so the past, the present, and the future. For content, as long as you answer all 4 bullet points, and your communication is clear, and you have a minimum of 2 justified opinions, there's no reason you won't be able to get full marks for this. Now to move on to the slightly harder 150 word question. For AQA, you only get 2 bullet points, which is what I think makes this question harder, but for Edexcel, you get 4 bullet points. So to plan this question, 5 minutes should be enough time. First, of course, read it, then, like last time, write the tenses beside each bullet point. For this question, the acronym I will use is PLACES. So para decir la verdad, lo que más me gusta es que, a mi juicio, cuando sea mayor, está como una cabra, and siempre me ha gustado. Again, for your exam, feel free to use the same acronyms that I've used, or make up your own, and make some short notes on how you're going to answer the question. This is more important for the 150 word question, as writing about 80 words on just one bullet point can be hard. So to avoid waffling and going off topic, focus more time on planning what you're going to say. For example, bullet point 2 is if you think it is important to go to uni. I would make a list of 2 advantages and 2 disadvantages in my plan. Okay, again, you may pause the video to have a go at this question yourself. This is my answer to both of these bullet points. Let's have a read through it. Siempre me ha gustado, so immediately beginning with one of my spicy phrases, so I can tick off the last phrase here. Siempre me ha gustado tener un trabajo ideal en el futuro donde puedo usar mis habilidades. Estaría como una cabra si fuera astronauta. Again, using the idiom in the second sentence, so I would go crazy if I was an astronaut. Lo que más me gusta es, again, using one of my spicy phrases, so I can tick that off. Lo que más me gusta es explorar el espacio y el universo. Cuando sea mayor, again, cuando sea mayor me gustaría mirar las estrellas y aprender sobre los planetas. Sin embargo, cuando era pequeño quería ser médico, ya que podría ayudar a las personas. También me fascinaba el cuerpo humano, pero para decir la verdad, ahora me da asco y pienso que ser médico es cansado. So here I've used another one of my phrases, so I've only got one left, which is a mi juicio. Okay, so in the first paragraph, I've used both the conditional tense and the imperfect tense. Moving on to the second paragraph, a mi juicio, so immediately create a sentence starter and taking off my final spicy phrase. Hay ventajas y desventajas de ir a la universidad hoy en día. Por ejemplo, una ventaja es que puedo obtener un título y trabajar en lugares de importancia, como hospitales. Según mi madre, es necesario ir a la universidad para asegurar su futuro. Por otro lado, es demasiado caro ir a la universidad en Inglaterra. En el futuro iré a la universidad para estudiar las ciencias. Qué interesante. So in the final paragraph, I've used both the present tense and the future tense, and I've weighed both sides of the argument, so giving advantages to going to uni and disadvantages. Doing this will help you fill sort of the word gap of 80 words approximately for each bullet point, but you don't have to write the same amount for each one. Same with the 90 word question, if you're more confident on one bullet point, you can write more words for that, less for the others, that's perfectly fine, as long as you answer each bullet point. The 32 marks at AQA come from these 3 categories: content, range of language, and accuracy. To get in the top mark band for content, you need an excellent response which is fully relevant and detailed, conveying a lot of information. Communication must be clear with little or no ambiguity, and opinions are expressed and justified. For range of language, you must have a very good variety of appropriate vocabulary and structures, so using those spicy phrases. More complex structures are handled with confidence, producing a fluent piece of coherent writing. The style and register are appropriate. And for accuracy, your writing must be accurate, although there may be a few minor errors, especially in attempts and more complex structures. Verbs and tense formations must be correct. The last question on the writing paper is the translation, which is worth 12 marks. Here is an example from a previous AQA paper. Pause the video and have a go at it yourself. Okay, here is a possible answer for this question. So in the winter, en el invierno, make sure you note your seasons. So summer is verano, autumn, otoño, and spring, primavera. It is cold, hace frío en nuestros pueblos, in our towns, and I think that we must do more for the homeless people. Pienso que debemos hacer más para los sin techo. Los sin techo is the way of saying people without a roof or homeless people. Cuando salí del colegio ayer, when I left school yesterday, fui a comprar un videojuego. I went to buy a video game que fue bastante caro. That was quite expensive. Estaba triste porque I was sad because vi una vieja. I saw an old lady, or you can say una anciana o una mujer mayor que estaba viviendo, who was living, en la calle. It's not en el calle, it's en la calle. Lastly, I'm going to give you some translation tips. As I mentioned earlier, the translation at the end of the writing paper is slightly harder than the one at the end of the reading paper, as this is English into Spanish. In the 10 minutes you should have for this question, first you need to read the entire text. Then, when you do begin translating, write the translation for each sentence on a different line, leaving a gap in between each sentence. This will give you space to make corrections if later you want to cross out words and make sure your work is neat. Also, keep in mind that in Spanish, the word order is not the same as in English, for example with adjectives which go after nouns. And for verbs, you need accents. This applies to the entire writing paper. For words that are not verbs, accents do not cost you marks, but for verbs they do, as often accents will completely change the meaning of the verb. Looking at the mark scheme for these questions, you get 6 marks for conveying key messages, and another 6 marks for general accuracy. The text is always split into 13 sections, and if you get the main gist of that section correct, i.e. no major errors, you get a tick for that section. As you can see in the table, 13 ticks gets you full marks for conveying key messages. Then another 6 are awarded depending on your accuracy. Last thing to mention is that in these translations, the examiners love putting irregular verbs to catch you out. For example, quiso meaning he wanted. After you finish this video, I recommend practicing loads of translations. And just because it's the last question on the paper, don't neglect revising it. These 12 marks can be quite easy to achieve. Well, that's it for this video. We've gone through each question of the writing paper and I've answered each of the questions as an example. If you want any tutoring during the half term to work on reading or listening or writing, send me an email or message me on TikTok. Otherwise, best of luck and adios.